You have to take things slowly and see if there's a trend, because if I was just like going on a whim on everything that feels like it's a good opportunity, it's a good project, it's something, I would not be profitable at first, and I would be spending so much time working on trying out stuff and
Hmm.
maybe getting into all sorts of weird situations where things aren't working out.
Hey everyone, I'm Trent, a fabricator, designer, and Autodesker. Welcome to Shop Talk, a podcast where we talk to designers and makers live from the workshop. Today, we're speaking with founder and CEO Francis Deslauriers of Unik Metals. We'll be discussing businesses, customization to product creation, AI, and why I shouldn't talk to customers. Let's dive in. Francis, awesome to see you again. I would like to just say thanks for joining the podcast. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
So my business, Unik Metal, is located, well, I'm in Quebec, an hour east of Montreal. So what we do mostly is we build custom architectural products. So it's a fancy word to say we build staircases, guardrails, glass. I'm not sure how to say that in English, but it's like glass separation, glass walls, and structures. So anything that has to do with fancy homes, basically. So and anything made out of metal, obviously. So we manage project, we design, and we subcontract some of the fabrication, and we just take a project from start. So let's say you would want to build you're building a house and you want to have a fancy glass wall, a big staircase, some really wow things in your house. Well, we would grab the project from start and wrap this up and make sure that at the end you get what you asked for.
Yeah, awesome. I think that's an interesting thing to kind of kick off the conversation with. I think a lot of people want to draw these lines of like this division between engineering, product design, and kind of building products or larger architectural, um, you know, projects or products, quite frankly. And as a recovering architect myself, so I went to school for architecture and got
Mhm.
super into advanced manufacturing. I was lucky enough that my architecture school had a really tight knit relationship with the engineering department. And, one of the things being able to look both at kind of the architectural world, building and fabrication world, large scale fabrication, and product design, I think one of the things that interests me the most and gets me excited about what you and Unik Metals are doing is you're kind of bridging this gap, right? You're bridging this gap between architectural environment typically is considered custom fabrication, right? You have a singular site, has its own list of dimensions, requirements, whether those are building codes or your customer requirements, right? Some folks might like wood, some folks might like metal, some folks might like really weird things that like you quite frankly are like, this is going to look terrible.
Yep.
But
Yep.
I mean, it's crazy how many people have really wild tastes. Um,
Yes.
but what's interesting is it seems like you've made this really great stride, at least in your local business community, to scale this business that looks at the architectural environment as a product design solution. I mean, do you think that's a fair statement? Do you think that you look at what you're doing as a singular product, or do you look at it as an architectural product? Like, is it architecture or is it product design?
Uh, I mean, it's hard to answer because, like, from a business standpoint, I try and standardize everything as much as possible because, as you know, product design, well, as you probably know, product design, I mean, you're testing stuff out. You're trying things, and I mean, it's those projects are most of the time fun. Sometimes they aren't. It depends on who's involved, but there's a lot of risk involved with that. So when you're trying something new, when a customer or an architectural firm comes up to you with a project and, like you said, some weird stuff, and you're like, yeah, can we do it? Probably we can do it. Do we have the budget for it? Probably. uh, and it's trying to find the balance between, do I want to do crazy stuff, or do I want to have a thriving business and actually make something out of it, make some profit at the end? Because I did a lot of trial and error, and before we got to a point where we had some solid products that we can say like, this is a model that you can purchase. We're going to adapt it to your need and we'll custom fabricate it. But these are the main lines of the product. Before we got there, I must say there was a lot of stuff that we made that we weren't too sure was going to be all right and meet the requirements. We had to redo some stuff, so a lot of trial and errors. And you probably suspect that this gets costly, and you're putting a lot of time. So I try to get a balance between both of those.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you hit on something that's really, for me, really relevant because it's a fine line between customization and mass customization and like the actual, time constraints, budget constraints, and sometimes can be material constraints if something changes so drastically, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting dynamic to have to solve as a business owner in kind of the building fabrication, kind of architectural product design realms. In my shop, we do a lot of one-off custom stuff. But we also had a product line for a long time. And what we worked to really do was enable mass customization through our product line, through intelligent ways of fabricating and working with customers. And I think that's why your story really resonates with me, because these ideas aren't born out of, trying to change the world. It's born out of just a clear need to satisfy a customer's need, right? Like you might have 10 customers who want a custom project every year, but sometimes that's not enough. And you need to find more customers who are willing to invest in your style or your aesthetic or your fabrication skills or the product that you are ending up customizing. But there is kind of some generalizations that can happen. And if you do it in the right way from a design perspective, you can implement that mass customization really easily. So it sounds to me like you're kind of at this, confluence point in your business where you've scaled you've scaled custom fabrication to an extent to where you've seen the direct need, the product market fit, as we'll call it, for this customizable product. I mean, is that a fair statement? Is that really like what your business has come to see as its biggest opportunity, do you think?
Yes, I would say that it's sort of mostly true. I call these R&D projects because that's what they are. I mean, when you get to a point where you want to customize, well, some people have some really custom IDs, let's say. When you get to that point, the question I'm always asking myself is like, is this something like we're willing to try some stuff out, but is this something that's going to be recurring? Do a lot of people have wants for this? Because like lately, I've been getting all sorts of projects that are quite similar. So it's a specific style of staircase that every people are asking for. And I'm not too hot on the idea of involving some time into this. At first, I wasn't too hot, but then you get to a point where one person asks you for that, and you're like, oh, well, I'm not too sure. And then 2, 3, 5, 6, and then you get to a point where you ask yourself, well, if people are asking, do they need it? Need is a big word in the field I work in, but do they want it? Are they willing to pay for it? Are they willing to commit to this? And you get to a point where you wonder, like, do I invest some time in this? And I mean, you have to take things slowly and see if there's a trend, because if I was just like going on a whim on everything that feels like it's a good opportunity, it's a good project, it's something, I would not be profitable at first, and I would be spending so much time working on trying out stuff and maybe getting into all sorts of weird situations where things aren't working out. And but like I said, I try to have a balance between both. I don't know if that answers your question.
No. I think that it totally does. I mean, it sparks more questions for me, which I love talking about this stuff, because I think realistically, the idea of designing or building anything is a super dynamic problem. It doesn't matter if you're putting rovers on the moon or on Mars, or you're building custom staircases for a client, right? Like they all have their set of problems. But I think what's interesting about the architectural focused work that you're doing is, quite frankly, you get one chance to do it perfectly. Like if
Yeah.
you're building a rover, you're going to go through thousands of iterations,
Yeah.
thousands, and more or less, you're going to prototype almost every single component on that, or you will go with the tried and true that's in your library or your kit of parts, but you will at least make more than one prototype. Your prototyping is 100% digital, with the rare occasion that you may be able to 3D print or, weld up some type of connection to test it or things like that. I mean, talk me through your process a little bit. For the viewers who might be more engineering focused or product focused, like think about that for a minute, that you get one of one chance to do a very big thing that has a tremendous amount of cost to it. I think understanding what your process is in engaging with customers would be really fascinating for a lot of people. So like, let's say, little hypothetical here. I knock on your door and I'm like, Francis, I got this mansion. I want to deck it out in some staircases or some custom fabrication. What's next? What do you do?
Uh, I would say the first thing I would do is see if I can if I'm the right person for the project, because there's various stages of like the word mention that you use. It's not a scary word, but like it depends on. There's people that want like $200,000 staircases that are spinning and that need to be craned into the house. I'm not into those kinds of projects, and I don't think I want to be. I mean, I have probably the knowledge to do them, but I would probably filter out at first. Okay, do I have something in my backpack that I can give out to you? Do I have a product that fits your needs? So
Okay, real
that's
quick though, that
the
sounds
first
like
thing.
a Bond villain request, does it not? Like a Bond villain would knock on your door and ask for like a spinning staircase with sharks and lasers and things like that. And the reality is, just for people listening or watching, that's true. People ask for those things. It's
They do.
insane.
They do. I get some of those. Usually it's not like crazy stuff, but it's like I have this budget and I want to make something that doesn't that the rules of physics won't allow. I want to have floating stuff. So when you get those customers, well, you gotta tone it down a bit. You gotta sort
Right.
of like cool things down and like, okay, like I might be like good at what I do, I think, but there are some rules that I have to follow. Like metal has a weight, it flexes, it's so you know the whole deal. But
Yeah.
first of all, like the first step is really looking at if I can satisfy the need, if I sort of like gauge out the customer, and then we'll go into the sort of term that you use that resonates with me, the virtual prototyping or virtual like this is what the second phase is. So usually when if you were to knock on my door and you're like, okay, so here's my project, I would set out and go see the project on site, because I'm usually on site on every project that I touch,
Mm.
because grabbing the measurement is like the most important. Like the rest of it is simple. Once you got a solid um, modeling of the house, because that's what we do. That's what I do. Um, we go on site and we model the part of the house that we're going to be working on. So
And are you 3D scanning? Are you doing physical, like laser measurements? I mean, like
uh,
what's that for you?
we tried a few systems. I mean, we tried there's a thing, I think it's called a DIMPRO, or a thing with a
Mhm.
rope that you sort of pull everywhere. Um, it was nice, but like I think it's a $25,000 tool here in Canada. Um, I couldn't justify the value of this. We tried another one that was sort of like doing the same thing but with a laser point. It wasn't. It was far too complicated to set up. I mean, I had some demos of this from salesmen, and I couldn't see the added value. So we're just using the lasers and tapes, and we're grabbing what makes sense, because even though you grab like super precise measurement with the expensive tool, well, houses are not straight. They,
Right.
they are not straight. You'll see a half inch of deviation on the floor. If you're doing like you said, if we're taking an old manor and fixing it up, well, floors are not going to be straight. The walls are not going to be straight. Uh, Everything will have to be torn down and redone. So there's no real value to the. I remember the salesman was telling me like this thing is precise to I don't know 164 of an inch, and I'm like, well, I don't care. I don't
Right.
need that kind of precision. So
Totally.
yeah, we model everything by hand. So I just go on site, have an unfolding table, a cheap Costco table, I think, that just
Hmm.
unfolds. I set this up, set the laptop on it, and I open up Fusion and I just model things
Yeah.
and grab measurement. And all the trades guy, the electrician, are all laughing at this because I sort of like show up. It seems like I'm showing up for lunch because I'm unpacking everything. But I mean, the joke's getting old. I'm getting it like every week, but this is
Yeah.
basically what I do.
Well,
Uh,
I want to pause there because I think that is really interesting to me because I think for a lot of folks they don't realize that like when you're designing a building, when you're building a house, something like that, right? You traditionally architects are working predominantly in 3D nowadays. But when you go to the old houses and things like that, these are paper drawings. Many of them aren't in AutoCAD. Many of them haven't been digitized. You can pay for services to like scan your documents and turn them into line drawings and things like that. So when you look on the piece of paper and you see that a wall is supposed to be, we'll make it easy, like 10 feet long, 12 feet tall, and 6 inches thick or something like that. Those are like the spec dimensions. Those are what we would get in product design as your, drawing packet that has your tolerances on them. Well, like you said, then you have the as-builts. And the as-builts are, oh, this wall is actually 10.5 feet long, or it's 5 inches, 5 and 5/8 inch thick, yada, yada, yada. And I've been around a lot of really interesting projects in my day that try to leverage a lot of the future tech that I think absolutely has a place in what we do. Like I absolutely think that, drone 3D imaging, LiDAR, robotic kind of like outline machines that are happening where they're tracing the footprint and giving you a two-dimensional drawing, the ones who are giving you a 3D scan of everything, 100%, full stop. That is the future. That is absolutely an amazing tool. And we do it in product design. I mean, companies like BBI will scan their entire like engine bay of a Porsche so that they can build new engines for these things. I mean, it's really not that hard to consider a Porsche engine compartment as the same as a 4,000 square foot, 100-year-old mansion or whatever. But you hit on something that is really interesting for a lot of people, I think, in this industry is accessibility to future technology and the costs associated with it. Like a $21,000 system to give you a 64th of tolerance, you're right. That's pretty ludicrous. Like, why? You have to ask the question, who needs that level of clarity or precision when we know that a 2x4 isn't 2 inches by 4 inches? You know what I mean?
yeah,
Like it's pretty wild to think about. But I mean, but that's what makes your business really interesting is that you've kind of fused this traditional way of working with industry futures, right? And I would say that 3D modeling from a product level in the architectural fabrication environment is a futures. Like there's not a lot of people are doing it, but we don't talk about it very often. So like when you go in and you get, these trades folks giving you grief about, your lunch kit and your little foldable table and things like that, which, whatever. Um, After you get your measurements, like what's your process after that? Like you've got all your data, you've got it at the model level. Where do you go from there? Like how do you collaborate with customers? How are you building these things? How are you baking into your process variability? Because unlike contract manufacturing, I bet your clients change their mind a lot.
yeah. If I'm lucky, it's just on color. Like this is easy. We just changed the PO for the powder coat. That's easy. But when they actually change their mind on a design, on a model, or something like that, it can get quite complicated. we get a few of those. It's a minority of customers, but you know it when you meet them. You know, okay, so we won't go too far. We'll just test out, and we'll figure out like what they want to do. And you got a lot of customers that are like during the pandemic, it was crazy. Construction here was crazy, and people were
Mm.
really like rushing out to get their stuff done, and they needed to move in, and there was a lot of pressure on, well, timeline related pressure. So I would have people come up to me and say like, okay, so I want to build a staircase. I want this, I want that. And they had no idea what they wanted. So what type of
Mm.
guardrails do you want? Do you want glass? Do you like more metal? Do you like more wood? They had absolutely no idea. And they're just like, they were just like pressing for when can I get it
Mm.
without knowing what they wanted. So it's a really tricky problem to solve. And I spent a lot of time trying to, I haven't solved it. I just sort of like made it less problematic.
You know what's really interesting? So I'm curious to get your take on this. You said a lot there that really, eh, I have a lot of experience having those same pain points, quite frankly, like customers changing their minds, customers not knowing what they want. And I think part of it is lack of awareness in how these things work, but also more often than not, customers are engaging a designer and a fabricator or a machinist or a, industrial designer or something because they're not the expert in that field. They've never built a table before. They've never built a set of stairs. They've never built a house. They've never built a rocket ship, right? So you go out and you find the people who know the best. The reality, though, is that that could be a really scary moment for someone because one, there's a cost associated to it. Like, hey, I want a staircase for my house that is like the house I hope to grow old in. Francis, help me build a house or help me build a staircase. I'm sorry, you want how much for this? That's normally the sticker shock. But then it's like, okay, I've gotten over that. Or, hey, you know what? That's awesome. I'm totally fine with that. Let's do this. The reality is that they are being asked to make a decision before they can ever try, right? There's no
Mhm.
try before you buy mentality in the architectural environment or the building and fabrication environment.
Yep.
And I'm curious because I think there's kind of two streams of thought for me on this one. One, I think that's the scary part. That's stream of thought number one is that they've never done it before and new things are scary. And on that note, technology can be scary for people because there's immediately this massive learning curve where you're sitting there and you're like, well, I have to understand now how this 3D modeling is working, or you're going to show me a 3D model, or, all of these things. So there's this learning curve that folks have to get over. And I think a lot of the times generations who grew up with technology in certain like areas of focus are more appropriately like, yeah, that's amazing, and have that expectation, right? Like if a 25-year-old was going to go out and build a house today, the reality is there's probably a lot more technology built into that house and they'd be a lot easier with accommodating that in their design process. But when you start to add the complexity of a 3D model on top of the cost, on top of the time durations, on top of they've probably never built a set of stairs before, there's a lot of collaboration and early and often communication that has to happen to put these folks at ease. And I'm really curious because I think sending renders, sharing files with people you're collaborating with, walking them through the 3D design or even showing them how they can make changes on the fly with you is really interesting. But I'm curious, like, have you started to play around with, virtual collaboration, right? Like sending your clients a VR headset and walking through the site with them and saying, this is what it'll feel like. I personally haven't. I have some colleagues who have, and it's pretty polarizing, quite frankly, on whether or not folks, because see problem two that I just said about using technology that's scary to people, right? Like there's these continual mountains that we have to get over to just collaborate. I don't know. I mean, have you thought about that? Has that something Has that popped up in your local community or in your work or?
We're starting to hear about it. I heard about there's a business or startup that are actually renting warehouses, and they'll do you a VR tour. It's sort of like an architectural firm. They'll draw your house, and you can actually walk in it. And um, we're starting to see it here. It's still
Yeah.
pretty new, even though like to guys like us, it doesn't feel so like so far fetched or so complicated, but it's the same problem as before. It's is there a real need for that? And like the transition, I mean, people are going from like 3D renders from architectural firms. They're going from this to like, okay, this is a 3D model that I can actually play with. And like, I don't think we've reached the step where people are like, okay, well, I want to be able to walk in my virtual house,
Right.
because I've been playing a bit with AR, and I mean it's a nice tool. It's great in some occasions, and it's definitely not virtual reality, but it's close to it. It's in the um, same sort of offer. And the reaction to this, people are like, well, okay, it's cool, but like if I send a 3D AR model to someone of a guardrail of something up to scale, they can actually throw it into their house and see how it looks like. Um, they're happy with just viewing the 3D model inside of a browser, and they're
Right.
not asking for more. So, I mean, maybe I'm getting left behind. I'm not like catching up on this, but so far people are not asking it for it. So there is a bit of like it's a little bit more work for us
Yeah.
to do it. So we're not talking about it too much, and we're keeping. But I feel like it's funny that you bring this up, because like they are in the construction world. There's so many like things that are going wrong, that mistakes on plans and stuff like that, and people they sort of like make a 100,000, well, more than a couple of $100,000 purchase on a house, and at some point they're building it, and they walk to the side and like, well, I thought this the walk-in would feel bigger. I thought this, and
Right.
then they start moving things around, and then the architects are not aware of these changes. The crew, they just like wing it and change things around, and then there's some other things that are coming up. So this wall was there for a reason, and so to be actually able to go inside your house first and get a feel for what you're going to be buying and what you're going to be doing, what you're going to commit to. I mean, these are things that you would see up front, and you could actually make the change when they are needed, instead of downstream where it messes everything up. So I think we'll slowly get to there, but I think the pricing for something like that, from what I've heard, I haven't personally like looked into it, but from what I've heard from design firm, it's still pretty expensive. And
Yeah.
I mean, if you're building a mansion, you can probably afford it. You can probably justify it. If you're building like a small house, you're not into that market
Right.
so far.
Right. I think too, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think it's context. If like Rivian, for instance, if Rivian is going to build a new gigafactory, 100% they would do really well to have a virtual digital twin of that so that they can really assess their production output lines, their raw material in, their products out. There's clearly going to be probably like a customer center. They could take a tour of what a customer would experience. And I think on that scale, it makes a lot of sense. I think you hit on something for me that makes a little bit of sense too, is like, I think the AR side of it can make sense if it's the right customer. From a product design perspective, I've had a lot of success in sending folks, like in Fusion, you can export an AR model and you can like hold it up in your iPad or your iPod or your, iPhone or something, and you can see it in context. And folks are like, oh man, that's great. That looks awesome. And, realistically, I have to walk them a little bit through the scale, because that's the other thing is like, there's, human perception, our perception walking through the world. We know the size of things. We've bumped into it. We've stubbed our toes on it. We've lived in it. We've driven it. We've laid on it. We've engaged with it. So folks actually, you can have anybody on the planet close their eyes and say, here's a coffee cup. What's the size of it? And generally speaking, they'll probably be like, oh, it's about this big, right? And it's that wide. When you add a digital realm to this, no one has that context yet. Like that we've not lived in a physical and digital world long enough to be able to kind of start to apply that just like embodied knowledge to how big something is. And that's the thing that ends up giving me more grief than anything is that moment. Then you said it. Oh, I thought the closet was going to be bigger. Like to me, that's a punch in the gut. Like I don't know about you. Well, and also don't listen to me because I'm terrible with customers. Like I am not the person you want talking to customers. My sales pitch is like, hey, do you want this? And they're like, no. And I'm like, sick. I'll see you later.
I'm
So
essentially the same.
I'm bad at it. But I think, taking the like humor out of it, there is like, I think we're at this like, I don't know. I think we're on the cusp of more digital adoption in that sense, especially in the field you're working with and in. But I do think there's a lot of context that has to have like in that moment for it to be successful. And then truthfully, I think that there is a lot of um I think that there's a lot of legacy ways of doing things, especially in the construction field, where folks just don't like change. So, you go in with your computer, your 3D scanner, or your measuring devices, and, you kind of become like a joke in a way. Reality is they're all probably fans of your work and you do great work and they like good, like things well made. But I think it's more them an uneasiness in new ways of doing things. Because if you've had a career for 30 years, you got one way you like to do it.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's the case.
It's
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Because it definitely with where I'm at. So I actually I do a lot of my personal projects revolve around ranch operations. Like for instance, I just shipped this big mobile sheep shack for our flock of sheep we have. And I know this is a technology podcast, but yeah, I also do it from a 500-acre ranch. Um, Not my ranch, but the reality is that, in those moments, there's a lot of expectations like in that field where like there's one way of doing things. Like they've been doing it for generations. Construction is one of those things. Construction's a lot of the times it's been, code has some influence on it, but it's multi-generational folks learning from their
yeah.
mentors or their parents or whatever. So I imagine that there's a pretty steep learning curve or adoption curve really for you with regards to your like digification of building these things. So I think, in your perspective from a business owner, what do you think the role of technology has in you scaling your business? Like, do you think scaling your business is a problem of just more leads and more sales? Or do you think it's a technology adoption? Or do you think it's a process optimization problem?
There needs to be a balance between everything. But one thing that I'm noticing is that the fact that I focused on technology and on really controlling the whole process, that's what got me in business at first. So like I didn't start by selling stuff that I would figure out how to make. I started by showing people I could make the stuff, and some people were like, "Okay, well, I'm going to work with this guy." So I'm mostly working with businesses now, and that's how I got the first customers. But now I have to focus on telling the other people because otherwise I just have a process that's good for a few customers. So it's striking a fine balance between everything, and that's the hard part because that's where you get to a point where you need to build a team. Like you were saying, for you the sell process is, do you want it or not? And if you don't want it, well, I might as well go do some other stuff.
Right.
And it's realizing at some point, like I'm not the one that should be selling to customer. I have to do it because we're still small. But at one
Right.
point, I have to find a guy. I have to find a guy with a big mouth and nice looking. He's going to go out, a guy or girl, whatever. And that he's going to go and grab this work and just bring to me the stuff I know to do, and let him do what he's good at. And it's getting to that point where you accepting it is a thing, but like actually doing it and saying to yourself, well, I'm hiring a guy full time to do this because this is not what I should do. I think this will be the breaking point where you start to really scale up. And well, I hope that's what's going to happen for me, because that's what I'm in the process of doing. But I mean, you have to understand at some point you have your strength and your weaknesses, and
100%.
you can work on your weaknesses, and you can try to be good on everything. But I don't know if you have this saying in English, but like when you don't have a lot of peanut butter, you just try and spread it as much as you can. And you
I have
just
something similar. Yeah.
So in French, it sounds a lot nicer.
Nice.
But that's the thing. You have to focus on what you're good on, and
Yeah.
so I try to focus more on process and technology, because that's where
Yeah.
what I feel comfortable with. And yeah, that's what I would say to this.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's great advice for anyone watching who has, entrepreneurial aspirations. And quite frankly, like my career, I've been lucky enough to lead some businesses. And that is honestly the best lesson I learned was I need to get out of the way of the progress of the company. I am really good at certain things. Like I stated, customer experiences is not one of those things. I'm good at strategic thinking. I'm good at product development. I'm good at fabrication, but selling, no. And so I think you having that mentality is an amazing key to success. And quite frankly, one that if you can learn it early in your endeavors, good for you. I think the other part that really resonates with me is, you talk about kind of transforming your business and the way your business operates through technology. And quite frankly, there's a couple of things that makes me think about that. Or a couple of things I think about when you say things like that. So realistically, we're living in kind of the industrial revolution 4.0, industry 4.0. And basically what that is, if you look at like the academic perspective of 4.0, it's digitalization. It's the digitization of processes, virtual twins, digital transformation, industry clouds, right? Cloud enabled, kind of multifaceted design and make things, right? Like that's 4.0. And we're here, we're living it, we're loving it, we're doing great at it, everyone's happy. But my personal view is that we're also on the cusp of 5.0. And 5.0, I think as soon as artificial intelligence came out to the mass public, we have to ask ourselves the question of, okay, what role does artificial intelligence have in the realm of business? What does it have in the realm of design and make and fabrication and all of these things? So that, because if you look at 5.0's definition, it's really around like human centricity. Like, how do we engage with our customers, ourselves, our teams, our supply chains? How do we extend our node of us, we're a node, into a network of capabilities, right? And that's really what 5.0 is. And I think, quite frankly, the boat to 5.0 is artificial intelligence. But, you hit on a lot of that stuff about the next phases for your business with regards to working with supply chains, working with contract manufacturers, the cost of contract manufacturing versus the expectation a customer might have. There's no way that we can pass that cost on to the customer after we've already bid something. Mm-hmm. So, thinking about where your business is headed, where you want it to go, like what's your, this is a bit of a like oddball question, but I'd love to get your perspective on it. Like, what do you think the role of AI has in your business scaling to where you want it to be at the size you want it to be? And where do you think your business falls in line with regards to industry 4.0 or 5.0? Like, do you have opinions on that? Is that something that you think about as a business owner and entrepreneur, or are you just kind of heads down doing the work, making sure everybody's happy?
A mix of both, but It's funny you bring that up because right before we started the podcast, I had a meeting with a guy from Autodesk about automated drawing.
Okay.
And so he wanted some review because I brought something up, and he's like, for sheet metal, and he's like, so what's the standard and everything. So we talked about this for a while, and at some point, I'm like, we were talking about automated drawing, and I'm like, I asked him, do it's automated, but does it learn? And he's
Mm.
like, I don't think so. And I'm like, because I like to set up my drawings in a certain way. I like to have this there, this there, this there. And I think I heard that it learns, or maybe I assumed that it learned because it was automated, and I was thinking about AI.
Yeah.
And he told me, no, it's not learning yet. Well, not that I'm aware of. And my first reflex was like, okay, so you're bringing me something automated, and I automatically thought about AI, and I'm like, is this thing learning how I'm doing things? Because that's what I would be doing if I was teaching someone else. I would say to him like, we make our drawings this way, we code this, we put our dimensions like this, we set the ISO view there, so it's sort of standardized. And that was my first reflex to assume that this thing was AI driven, and that I would actually learn, okay, this business, they do things like that. So if I want to do what master wants me to do, I'll do things like that. And he told me, well, it's not there yet, but I think it's a great tool. It's still in the early phase.
When we talk about AI, it's really curious. More often than not, most folks automatically associate artificial intelligence with automation, which I think is a super fair correlation, right? Like AI is helping automate very tedious processes. We see it all the time, just like your example with a job description. But then realistically, when you get into the design, engineering, fabrication, production realm, automation is completely different or can be completely different. There could be AI automation, there can be parametric automation like configurations or any of those things, right? Like automated drawings, perfect example. Like automated drawings was built on a number of industry standards where in the early development it was learning what those standards were, and then as a production tool it goes out as an automation tool, not as an AI tool, right? Because quite frankly, there are so many regulations that you really would be just a huge time suck to try to get a intelligence system to say, okay, like what are you living, like which realm do you live in? Are you built in this ISO standard, or are you in this, or are you in this? And so I think that there's automation tools built using AI that then when they get productized or, go to a commercial user, it's just an automation tool. And I say just an automation tool, but realistically, it saves hundreds of hours of work. I was reading this one article, and I forget the company who did the study, but they were looking at effectively how much money does a business lose if they get one SKU of their hardware in their library incorrect. So what that means is, like, when I talk about a SKU in their hardware library, let's say I am making like a robot kind of, thing, like we'll use like a Roomba, right? Something like that. Like if I'm using, some type of small robot and I'm building it, and it might have 1,000 pieces of hardware. So it's got, 208 mil bolts. It's got blah, 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 blah. If on a production scale, I got that one SKU as an 8 mil wrong, like let's say it was a hex head and it should have been, whatever, like they said on average, corporations lose $230 per wrong SKU for a 10-cent part. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah,
when
yeah.
you look at $230 of a misplaced SKU on a component that has thousands, that could, for a certain company, equate to hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost revenue or margin based on one single piece of data that's incorrect. And that's why your points about data are really, really strong for me, because data is at the center of everything we do. Like if your data is wrong, like dirty data in is dirty data out, right? Like if
It is.
and so, you know, I just think it's so fascinating because then when you start to put together data as the backbone of everything that's made in the world, from the house you live in to the car you drive to the toothbrush you use, data is at the center of every single one of those things. And there's an immense amount of data in each one of those. But when you start to talk about automating process and the role data has in automation, you get super interesting topics. But when you start to add artificial intelligence into this as well, because for me, like I would look at it as like, okay, AI for me would be this awesome opportunity to be like, okay, so I have this stair set. It's got a rise over run of X and I got a span Y. Tell me how I can have the least amount of treads or the least amount of structural support to hold that so that it can handle, this amount of load per step. Well, quite frankly, you could do that in simulation. You could do that in, kind of effectively just run an FEA or anything like that. But you have to be an expert in that.
Yeah.
And I'm not an expert in that. I don't know if you are, but I'm not an expert in that.
I had to hire a friend who's an expert in that. He's a mechanical engineer, and he did a whole 25-page document to say like, okay, this is fine. And the only question I asked him, so what thickness of material do I use? And he's like,
Yeah.
oh, yeah, 316 is fine. Cool. You could have just told me
Just
that.
said that.
And he's really good in his field, but he's a friend of mine. But I'm like, you should have just told me that, not write a 20-page document.
Totally.
But yeah, you need to be really good in this field. And I mean, I started working and doing an FEA. I was like, oh, it can't be too complicated. I'll do it myself. And I'm like, well, do I want to rely on something that I think is right? I'm not sure of. So just dump it out. But it would be so amazing to have those little questions, those questions that like you said, what's the minimal amount of structural support, and like just like questions that you'll take 3, 4, 5 hours to get an answer to when they could just be figured out on the side. That would be amazing. That would be
I mean, honestly, that's what I like about generative. Like, quite frankly, I've used generative in actual production projects a couple of times, but like having the opportunity to use generative to just as an ideation tool, like that has been really helpful, especially since they have plates now, so I can actually do sheet metal. Because let's be real, I'm not gonna cast some crazy component that's built in surfaces or whatever in the sculpt environment and T-splines and all that. Like, I don't have time for that. I don't have the budget for that. It works amazingly for some projects, but when you start to scale it up, the use of generative with plates and sheet metal and water jet or plasma and doing weldments or bending, that to me becomes really interesting. I've done it a couple of times where, like, to your point, kind of thumbed through a couple of things and been like, oh, this would work. And it's expanded my capabilities because I didn't have to be an expert in it. Like, I didn't need the PhD in fluid dynamics or finite, element analysis or whatever it may be that I'm working in. And I think that to me is super interesting about where we're at with tools today, is like this democratization. And I don't use that word lightly, but like the fact that you can be a self-starter in a realm where typically you might have had to do multiple college degrees is pretty mind-boggling. And it really truly is kind of a democratization of that. So we talked about a lot. I'm really curious, like, what is the next, like, 0 to 2 years for Unik Metals? Like, what's your goal? What are you chasing, and what do you want to accomplish?
Well, like I said, I'm wrapping up all the sort of like basic product lines. So I have a deadline set in my calendar in red for the 1st of February, where I just wrote like in big, ready to sell. So it means ready to sell to like at large. So this is my short-term goal. And I've been working on a sort of new product line where I'll have to machine stuff in house. I actually have to make a custom extrusion die to get extruded aluminum. So I've never, it's not something that I've been, it doesn't seem too complicated, but it probably is. It's probably not that simple. So I have to figure out like everything, like not just like engineering wise, like getting the extrusion made, that's the easy part, but like evaluating the cost, the this and that, all the involved costs of doing this to get a product out the door that I think is going to sell pretty well. And then after that, it's bringing this manufacturing in-house. So I'm in the process of looking for not a warehouse, but a space to actually operate in. So I'm in the process of shopping for the tools, so the machinery to actually be able to do this. And in the 2 years, like, you probably know that like 2 years goes by like this. So getting this product out the door, controlling like everything that's revolving to this specific product and to the other products, and setting up a sort of a business that's able to distribute like to more customer, because it's good that I'm getting new customers, but will my supplier be able to follow? Is there something coming that I haven't planned? What are the competitors doing? So these are all things that I'll have to sort through when I get to these bridges, but just bring in some of the stuff in house, controlling the process, to be able to ship out these new products. And there's actually another field of product that I want to get into, which is related to architecture, but just working on all this stuff and hiring the people that will take care of what I won't have time to do. This is the next 2 year, I would say. It's pretty vague for an answer, but I mean,
that's business.
I don't know what I'm going to eat tomorrow, so I won't pretend that
Totally.
What I'll do in the next 3 months. But this is the big plan. But I have some deadlines set, because I think these are important. Because if you just say, "Well, I'll get ready when I'm ready," well, you need to add a little pressure, otherwise things
100%.
don't.
Any last thoughts on your mind? Anything you want to bring up, tell the audience, or make a point to chat about?
Well, one thing that I've been meaning to ask you, this is going to come out of nowhere, but you were talking about the generative, and I haven't tried it with the plate and stuff. And I mean, this is my nightmare scenario. I'm more talking about something, a fear of mine, but when you start working on something and you're designing something and you have an idea in mind, you're trying to design a product, and you sort of like open up your CAD, or you take a sheet of paper and you just like start from nowhere, and like how that never works. I mean, that probably happens to you. Well, I sure hope so, because I hope I'm not the only one struggling with this.
You are not the only one.
Like, I think it was I've listened to like a lot of video from it was funny because I just realized that there was a podcast with Saunders that was released 2 weeks ago. Actually, this is how I learned like everyone. It seems that this guy taught everyone how to do stuff, it feels like, but big thanks to him. But I think it was Pearson that said, like, every time you try to do something, you always do like at least 3 iterations of the design before you actually find something that sort of works. And I don't know how you deal with this. Like, it's more like of a question from me to you, but like, this is something that I'll spend like 5 hours working on prototype 1, let's say, and just like have to do the shame action of just right clicking and deleting the thing. And it hurts so bad every time.
Yeah. Well, first off, I think the question you're asking is a question anyone who makes anything is probably sitting there nodding their head like, yep, me too. I really take like an Edison approach to it. Edison's famous for saying, I only needed to find one way. Like, I found 1,000 ways not to make a light bulb is effectively what he says, and I only needed to find one way to make it. I think that there's a lot of value in failing? And I know it's kind of cheesy. It's a very cheesy answer, but realistically, here's the deal. I've pitched a lot of venture capitalists in my day, and more often than not, they really do like take failure seriously from a positive perspective. And that was something that I really took from those processes, was like being okay with the fact that, like, Edison spent years making the light bulb. And like, let's be clear, if anybody's sitting here like thinking like Trent's making himself sound like he's like as important as, no, I'm just saying I learned from that mentality that there's value in failure if you're mindful enough to not be discouraged by the fact that you failed. And I think that there's really good opportunities to not hitting delete and saying like, okay, what worked here, what didn't work here. And I think your question really has two parts. I think one is, how do you start from scratch? Like, what's the process to actually start something from scratch? I have I actually have a process where if I've hit like a creative block, like I call it writer's block, but like, make block, basically I just sit down and either just start drawing and just sketching and get back into like moving my hands and working through the problem in a very, very rudimentary way, which as a software user, that's counterintuitive, but there's like a physicality of working through it that helps me open it up. And then I'm like, oh, I'm going to try this. And I open up Fusion and I go for it. The other thing I'll do is I'll just go in the shop and I'll grab some scrap out of the scrap bin or something. And honestly, this might sound weird. I just start playing. And I
You
think as adult,
play
yeah,
yourself.
exactly. You just start playing. I think as adults and people who make things, for some odd reason, we forget that we got into this business because it's fun. Like, you're literally making something from nothing. That's fun. And fun has value to a successful business process. Like
Yep.
any business book you read, it will always talk about things, do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, or do something that you have a passion for and you'll have success in that.
Hmm.
I think that's rooted in fun. So the first part of your question, how do I deal with block or like the frustration of that? I don't put so much stress on myself to get it right the first time. Like, and I have fun while I do it, and I remember why I got into this business. The second part on finding value in failure, I don't know Jay Pearson personally. I've seen him speak a couple times. I think he's got an awesome outlook. I think he's always looking for continual improvement. He lives by the Kaizen way. He's always looking for efficiency gain, because I think, at least from the outside looking in and not knowing him, I think he really just loves figuring out hard process problems, which is like, I mean, we need people like that. But I also know that he's probably failed at solving those processes like a million times over.
Oh, for sure. For
You know what
sure.
I mean? And so at some point, he's learned this mechanism to be like, failure's okay. Like, we get this idea of like, failure's not an option. I got to do it the first time. Like, you know, you know what? That's a load. That's a crock. Like, everyone fails and we go through millions of iterations to get to that one thing. And you can start to really apply values of business to that product market fit, like understanding, like, I might go through 10 versions of my first product line before I actually figure out the small granular detail that my customers come to me for over my competitors. And you hope to figure that out before you go to market, but the reality is you don't know what you don't know. And so
Hmm.
you're gonna solve a problem you think needs to be solved, and you're gonna ship it. And quite frankly, maybe everyone's like, yeah, that's sick, but this random thing that you did, I actually want that. I need access to that. So, okay. So I personally have this thing with friends and family, and it's like the question of the day. And basically the question of the day is, you got no budget, you got no real world expectations. This is full like fairy tale world. If you could work on any project, don't worry about money, don't worry about resources, zero barriers, just any project, what would it be?
I
Yeah.
always wanted to work on an electric go-kart. I mean, it would feel so much nicer than the thing that we drive down the 9 HP things that are sluggish and slow
Yeah.
and don't have any pep. I mean, I used to work a bit on race cars. Well, like not race cars, race cars, but like 350Z modified race
Yeah. Yeah.
car for
Yeah. Yeah.
track. I worked a bit in this field when I was younger. It was really fun, really fun. But what would you
Well,
do
oh, wow.
if you
What would
don't
I
mind me
do?
asking?
No, I don't mind. So I have a lot of interests. Definitely something in cars would be really rad. I've gotten to build a couple cars. So like going one step further and working on like an F1 team or something like that would be just like mind-blowingly cool. But weirdly, and this is what's cool about the question of the day, is because it's whatever pops right into your head. I kind of thought it would be as soon as I asked the question and was listening to you, I think what would be really interesting to work on would be like basically like the next version of rail travel for the future, whether that be like hyperloop stuff or like underwater tube, like hyper tube underwater kind of stuff, like something about the scale of that and like the mix of civil engineering and infrastructure and like the crazy physics. I'm a big sailor. I love to sail. And like it's wild to think about how little we know about our oceans. And for some odd reason, as soon as I asked the question, I was like, underwater train. I want to work on an underwater train. So something like that. I don't know. I mean,
That's not what we would expect. That's
I
quite
know
yeah.
I have a weird imagination. I guess that's why they keep me around. I don't know. All right. So this is shop talk, right? So I can't get away without asking about your shop. So give us a little background on, you're talking about large scale fabrication here and you've got a lot of 3D printers in the background. Like, what's your space like? Where do you find yourself today taking this call from?
I'm actually in my home office. So this is what my home office looks like. So yes, there are a few 3D printers in there. I actually started, I wanted to 3D print parts at the start, which I realized that wasn't really an option for me. But the tool is great to have in my back pocket. So I use this for a lot of things. I was talking about the extrusions. I 3D printed an extrusion model just to figure out like the fits and everything before I actually commit to building
Yep.
a, a die. And so, yeah, this is what my home office looked like. Most of the time I'm on the road, so grabbing measurements and stuff. So I have my outside office, which is just like my folding table on the work site, and I operate from the garage for now.
Nice. Um, awesome, man. Well, it was really nice to chat with you, Francis. I really appreciate you taking the time. And I just want to say, like, you've got a really good focus. Like being on the other side, hearing your vision, hearing where you're taking it and the things that you're doing, like keep it up. Like I think that you're doing a great job for what it's worth. And I also am just super excited to see your company's growth and to see your company just continue to expand in its product offering. And I, for one, will be watching the whole time cheering you on. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners will too.
Well, thanks for having me.
Okay, that was awesome. But don't forget, like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay up to date. Also, if you're ready to try or buy, you can find the link in the description below.